We can go ahead and start.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining today. This is the first rulemaking advisory committee for the proposed fees for removal fill permits, general authorizations, wetland determinations, and delineations. Long name for this rulemaking. I think we'll usually just call it the removal fill permits rulemaking. My name is Sylvia Chiborowski, and I'll be helping to facilitate this process and these meetings moving forward. So really look forward to meeting you all today and getting started. So as you saw, this meeting is being recorded and will be part of the public record. And we're here today as just kind of a first introductory meeting so that you all have a solid understanding of the need for this rulemaking and just some background information to get you started so that you can help inform your comments and input moving forward. And we'll also have a chance today to talk about just the rulemaking process, roles and responsibilities, and we'll have plenty of future RAC meetings to get your input and dive into the details. So before we jump in today, I did want to give a chance to introduce the project team at the Department of State Lands, and then a chance for the Rulemaking Advisory Committee members to introduce yourselves. So maybe Danielle, if you want to take the slides down for a minute, we can do a little round the room introductions. I'll go to DSL staff first, and then we can just quickly hear from RAC members as well. So I'll go to Dana, then Danielle, and Pete and Russ, if you want to say hi.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dana Hicks. I work for DSL, and I'm the Planning and Policy Manager within the Aquatic Resource Management Program. Nice to have you.
Good morning. I'm Danielle Boudreau. I am the department's rulemaking coordinator, and I've been helping out with some other parts of this project as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Pete Ryan. I am the Aquatic Resource Specialist at DSL.
Good morning. Excuse me. Good morning. Russ Clausen, and Department of State Lands Removal Fill Specialist.
Great, thank you. All right, and then to our RAC members, if you just want to say hi, your organization, and just anything you want to say by way of introduction, would appreciate that. So I'll go first to Brad and then John. Oh, and also feel free to go on video if you can when introducing yourself and go off mute. And I did see that Brad maybe was having trouble with audio. Brad, are you able to hear us?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yep, great.
Yeah, Brad Livingston, Statewide Wetlands Program Coordinator for the Oregon Department of Transportation.
John Van Staveren. I'm a Senior Professional Wetlands Scientist with Pacific Habitat Services.
Welcome. And then let's go to Katie and Lauren.
Hi, I'm Katie Ryan. I'm the Executive Director with the Wetlands Conservancy.
Hi, Lauren Poor with the Oregon Farm Bureau.
And then Morgan and Peggy.
Good morning. My name is Morgan. I'm with the Coalition of Oregon School Administrators. And you might say, why is a K-12 person here? But I think those that know understand the removal fill program is heavily subsidized by the Common School Fund, which is a significant funding source for K-12 schools. And so I'm here on behalf of K-12 folks to represent our interests.
I'm Peggy Lynch, League of Women Voters of Oregon's Natural Resources Coordinator. And why is the League involved? Because the League has policies to make sure that we have wetlands for Oregon, but we also care about K-12 schools and the other issues that you will be dealing with. And we have supported the original bill that got us here today. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And then let's go to Samantha and Stephanie.
Hi, I am Samantha Bear representing the Oregon Home Builders Association.
I'm Stephanie Pulvers. I'm with Marion County. I'm here through an OAC's group, so kind of representing counties in general.
Perfect, thank you. Did I miss any RAC members in the introductions? All right, great. then let's dive back in. If you don't mind pulling up that agenda again, Danielle, the slides again. Okay, so I'll go through our agenda for the day and then we'll dive in. So we just did our introductions and then we'll have an opportunity to hear from Danielle about the rulemaking process. And then we'll dive into the roles and responsibilities for rulemaking advisory committee members and what to expect throughout the next 6 or so months here. And then you'll get a good look at the background and information that will help you get engaged in the rulemaking moving forward. So a lot of good background information today. Towards the end of the meeting around 10:45, we'll have time for interested party comments. And I should say, you know, around 10:45, if we're a little behind or ahead in our agenda, just make note of that. And then we'll just end with some next steps and adjourn the meeting by 11 o'clock a.m. And you should have also received a meeting packet before today's meeting that included several pieces that will be helpful for you to review. So if you didn't get that, let us know. And that should have included the agenda for today's meeting and the operating principles, so kind of the guidelines for the rulemaking advisory committee members and expectations. There was also an excerpt from the Aquatic Resource Management Annual Report that provides some good background information. And then House Bill 2238, which kind of spurred this rulemaking. And if you look in the chat, there's a link to the rulemaking webpage where you can get all of those documents. Right. So next slide. Yeah, thank you. Just a few Zoom protocols. You probably all are very familiar with Zoom, but just a reminder that when we get to discussion or Q&A periods, to use the raise hand button to get in the queue to make your comment. You can just do that by finding if you go to the very bottom, there's either a reactions button or a raise hand button, depending on your version of Zoom, and you can click on that. If you're here by phone only, you can just press *9 on your phone. And when we get to discussion periods, I'll just look for a balance of speaking time, trying to hear from everyone. And if you have any technical needs, you can send a Zoom message to Danielle here and she can help you with that. And we just ask for respect as we have our conversations. Okay, with that, I am going to turn to Danielle to go a little bit over the process for the RAC.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. The purpose of our RAC for this rulemaking is we've convened to provide input on proposed fees and related rule language for the removal fill regulatory program at the Department of State Lands. At subsequent RAC meetings, we will consider the proposed fees for removal fill permits and wetland delineation reports and general authorizations. So the RAC is part of our rulemaking process. The first step is we've established the need for rulemaking and we've drafted rule language. The approval to initiate is provided by either the DSL director or the state land board, and then DSL staff draft the initial rule language. We then move into our rulemaking advisory committee meetings, during which the draft rule language, the need for the rules, the fiscal impact statement, and racial equity statement are reviewed and approved. And from there, we move into our 30-day public comment period. A notice of proposed rulemaking is published by the Secretary of State, and a public rule hearing is held midway through the comment period. Once our comment period is finished and we have approval to file with the Secretary of State, either by the director or the state land board, we file the rules and they're adopted. Are there any questions so far about the rulemaking process or why we've convened the RAC? Okay. And then I'll turn it over to Sylvia now.
Great. Okay. So I'll just go through a bit about the Rulemaking Advisory Committee operating principles, and you received these in your meeting packet as well. So just a little bit about your role, my role as a facilitator, the department's role, and a little bit about your meeting schedule and just agreements for dialogue and protocols for kind of public comment and communications. And I should also say that today's meeting was going to be a lot of sort of talking at you. And of course, in the future, we'll have more opportunities for your input and ideas, but bear with us as we have kind of a lot of slides today so that everyone just has all of the information needed to engage. Okay, so just a little bit about your role as RAC members. You are here as advisory to the department. So this is an advisory board. And we do expect that folks will be attending and participating in the meetings, and meetings will also be recorded so that you can view them afterwards if you're not able to attend. And throughout the process, we really hope that RAC members are considering lots of issues and options as we kind of think through the rules. So as you hear the various issues that are going to be coming up, really just thinking about how to address them, discussing pros and cons, and finding recommendations that can meet the various interests in the RAC. Let's go to the next slide. So in advance of meetings, you'll be getting background information, and the DSL team will be really looking to try to get all information out a week in advance so that you do have time to review everything. And that background information will be important so that you can participate in the meetings. So that's an expectation to just review that. And then when we get into the meetings, we hope that you'll be working collaboratively with each other to explore issues and considering the many perspectives. This is built as a multi-interest rulemaking advisory committee so that we can get to the best solutions that meet various interests. So we hope that you can help in kind of thinking through those multiple perspectives. And next slide. As RAC members, we hope you can attend all meetings, but of course understand that you may need to have an alternate at some point. So if you do have an alternate, just let me know as soon as you can, and at least 24 hours before the RAC meeting so that we can get that person any background information that they need. And we would expect too that RAC members are coordinating with their alternates to make sure that they are informed and need what they need to participate in the meetings. Next slide. Here is our schedule of meetings. So we have today's meeting, and then in August, we have 2 meetings, one on the wetland determination and delineation report fees, and then a second on general authorization fees. In September, we'll have a meeting on individual, general, and emergency permits. And then in October, continue that discussion. There are also 2 meetings on the calendar for November and December, and those are potential meetings if needed, but please do continue to hold those. We're not sure where we'll be when we get there. So that's the schedule. And this is just some information about the team. So again, I'm your facilitator and my contact information is here. If you need to get in touch with me, I'll be your primary contact throughout the rulemaking. So I'll send out the emails before and after RAC meetings with information and meeting packets and notes, etc. And then your core Department of State Lands staff information is included on this slide here. So Danielle, Pete, and Russ are your go-tos for, some of those technical questions as well. All right. And then my role as your facilitator is really to help provide an environment where you feel like you can participate fully and, having these conversations to get your input on the proposed rule language and fees. And I am really interested in kind of these multi-interest processes, and, we'll try to seek out where can we find solutions that meet various interests throughout these meetings. I also have a role in providing meeting summaries, which you'll receive after the meetings, and to help coordinate between meetings. So again, if you have any questions or need anything, just send me an email or give me a call. And next slide. I do not have a stake in any outcome from this process. I'm here as just an impartial facilitator, and I will facilitate like that to the best of my ability. And I will probably make some process recommendations as we move along, but really hope that you are in charge of helping with kind of crafting the substance throughout the conversations. And if you reach out to me and want to talk about something in confidence, just know that I will keep that in confidence. But there are some strong written communications that are, written communications are subject to public records law and will be released if requested. So I'll go over a little bit of that later. Great. And next slide. And DSL staff is here to really provide the technical and administrative support and information that you all need to engage in the RAC and kind of receive your advice and fold that into the rules. And the Department of State Lands and primarily Danielle will be helping to schedule the meetings and make sure that we get all the meeting materials together and keep that public record for the RAC process. And next slide. So as we go into our meetings, just a few agreements that we hope you all can agree to is that you'll act in good faith throughout the RAC process, attend meetings and, inform your alternate if you do need to miss a meeting. And if you do miss a meeting, we also hope that you can review the recording and meeting summaries from previous meetings so that you can stay engaged as the primary RAC member. And of course, we ask for your respect throughout the meetings and really bring your concerns into the group space. This is a place where we really want to work through all of the issues. So hoping you bring your concerns here and not so much outside of the process. And next slide. Continuing on your agreements, we just expect that you would provide your input onto the proposed rule language and the fee schedules and the fiscal impact when we get there. And, if we get to places where something is not sitting right with you in the rules, we hope that you're proposing alternatives. So saying what you see as the issues, but then also saying, and here's how we can address that in a way that meets multiple interests. So we'll be looking for kind of those deeper comments as we move into the process. And also throughout the process, we will probably be sort of making some recommendations along the way. And we would ask that you avoid reopening issues once they're resolved. Of course, everything we do is sort of a agreement in principle as we move along. But if we're, at the 11th hour and something is coming up that should have been addressed earlier in the process, it does make it more difficult. So we really hope that you're bringing up core issues as early as possible in the process. And next slide. Here we have a little bit about just communications outside of the meeting. So if there are any communications outside of the meeting, we ask that they're mindful of just these procedural ground rules that we've been talking about, even if you're highlighting different perspectives. And if there are any media communications, we would ask that you defer to DSL for those.
All right.
We'll ask that you defer to DSL for any media communications and avoid representing RAC views outside of the meetings and represent just your own views unless otherwise directed or discussed. And I spoke about this before as well, but just we're really hoping that you raise all of your concerns at RAC meetings rather than through the media, especially for the first time. And next slide. So this is a public process and all of these meetings are open to the public and any written communications are open to the public and may be released in response to public records requests. So just be aware of that in your communications. And then lastly, we appreciate all interested parties that are joining today. Oh, sorry, next slide. Thank you. We appreciate all interested parties that are joining today and we invite you to observe. And we have opportunity towards the end of the meeting for your comments. So we appreciate you staying in listening mode throughout the conversation. And at the end of the process, there will also be additional time for public comment. So after the RAC process has concluded, DSL will invite public comment and we'll have a public hearing on the rules. So look forward to that. All right, that is it on your protocols and expectations. So that was a lot of information. So I'll just stop for a minute to see if there are any questions on any of those protocols. And I'll just see any concerns. Does any of that sound like something that you can't live with as RAC members? Right, great. And maybe before we dive into the next part of the agenda, Chris, I saw that you joined a little bit later. So Chris, do you want to just say hello and let us know who you are as one of the RAC members?
Sure. Good morning.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. And Christina also joined, but
Yeah,
Chris Ganon, go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, I'm Chris Gannon. I'm the director of the Crooked River Watershed Council. We're in Prineville, Oregon. Sorry for the delay this morning. I come to this RAC really as a probably practitioner on the low end of the spectrum, the low tech, low cost kind of tip of the spear end of the practitioners. We don't we don't do big industrial projects. It's all conservation work, voluntary conservation work for us out in Crook County. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chris. And Christina, do you want to say hello too, since you did come off mute for a minute there?
I'm so sorry. Usually people call me Chris, so it's just stuck in my head. But I'm Chris. I'm the director of the Klamath Tribes, our director of culture and heritage for the Klamath Tribes. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay, great. And I did see there was a question in the chat about getting a copy of the slides. I believe these will be posted. Is that right, Danielle?
Yes, they'll be posted within the week.
Perfect. Right. Okay, well, if there are no questions on the operating principles, then I'm going to hand it over to Danielle to go over some background to help you get everything you need to be informed for the rulemaking. So go ahead, Danielle.
Thank you. So as Sylvia said, I'll be going over some background for the Common School Fund and the Removal Fill Regulatory Program. So DSL is the administrative agency of the State Land Board, which oversees the lands Oregon was granted at statehood to help fund public schools and the Common School Fund. Every one of Oregon's 197 public school districts receives money from the Common School Fund every year. And here we have a table that just shows the distribution of the past 3 years. That's the total distribution that's split among all of the school districts. And today, DSL manages approximately 681,000 acres of school lands to produce revenue for the Common School Fund. Revenue generated by other DSL programs, including oversight of Oregon-owned waterways and the regulatory programs administering Oregon's removal fill law, also go to the fund. The Common School Fund interest earnings are part of the funding mix for DSL operations, but multiple DSL key performance measures and strategic initiatives are aimed at eliminating or reducing Common School Fund subsidy of our programs. The removal fill laws can be found in ORS 196.600 through 196.921. They govern the removal of material from the beds and banks or filling of the waters of the state, which include wetlands. These laws are in place for the protection, conservation, and best use of the water resources of the state. They're administered through the department's regulatory program, which issues permits or authorizations for the removal or filling of material. And the department's regulatory program includes wetland determinations, wetland delineation report review, and the issuance and enforcement of removal fill permits and general authorizations. Wetland determinations and delineation reports are governed by ORS 196.818 and administered through OAR 141-090. Determinations identify if potentially jurisdictional wetlands or other waters such as streams and ponds are present. A delineation report includes detailed mapping and documentation of the size, location, and other qualities of the wetlands and waters. A delineation report is needed to obtain a removal fill permit. Individual removal fill permits are governed by ORS 196.810 and are administered by OAR 141-085. These are permits that generally have more than minimal adverse effects to waterways or wetlands, are more complicated, often involve more than one removal fill activity, or involve a substantial mitigation obligation. These projects do not qualify for general permits or general authorizations. Types of permit activities include voluntary habitat enhancement, barrier removal, industrial development, overwater structures, and the building of parking areas or associated structures. General removal fill permits are governed by ORS 196.816 and implemented through OAR 141-093. General permits are a streamlined permit covering activities that are substantially similar in nature, recurring or ongoing, and have predictable effects and outcomes. General permits may be by order or established through rulemaking. Notably, the U.S. Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management have a general permit by order for certain restoration activities on public lands and partnering private lands in Oregon. While this counts as only one permit, many projects occur under it. Types of permit activities include dredging and the building of transportation-related structures. Emergency permits or emergency authorizations are governed under ORS 196.810. These are authorizations for emergencies that pose a direct threat to human health, safety, or substantial property, and where prompt removal fill action is required to address the threat. Approval is given as quickly as possible in emergency situations, but work must be limited to the minimum necessary to alleviate the threat. No state permits, often referred to as NSPs, are implemented through OAR 141-085-0555. These are applications that are determined to be exempt from needing a DSL permit applications that are determined to be exempt from needing a DSL permit are provided an official no state permit required letter by the department. Landowners may need this letter for various reasons, and these decisions do not require an application fee, but still require staff time to review and are an official decision. General authorizations are governed by ORS 196.850 and are implemented through OAR 141-089. General authorization is a streamlined permit for specific types of removal fill activities that have minimal adverse effects on wetlands and waterways. General authorizations are pre-approved, but require a 30-day notice to the department prior to the removal fill activity. Types of general authorizations include minimal disturbance within essential salmonid habitats, waterway habitat improvement, and non-motorized in-stream placer mining. Are there any questions about the background of the Common School Fund and the removal fill regulatory program? I know it's very broad and high level, but we'll get into more details as we get into the other meetings. Now we'll get into an overview and the need of the rulemaking. The current removal fill fee structure is outlined in ORS 196.815, which establishes base fees and stipulates fees will be adjusted annually based on changes to the Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers West region. The base fees were last increased during the 2007 regular legislative session, and the existing removal fill fee structure does not align with the actual permitting process, resulting in years of unmet cost. Existing fees charged for those services cover only 21% of costs associated with the removal fill permitting process. And the Common School Fund is heavily subsidizing the program. An average of $2.7 million is expended annually to cover the gap. Here we have a table that shows the last 5 years of revenues and expenditures for the regulatory program. And as you can see, we're at a 5-year average of 21%. We definitely expend more than we take in. In 2023, the Oregon legislature passed HB2238, which directs the department to adopt by rule a tiered fee structure for removal fill permits and wetland delineation reports and fees for general authorizations. Additionally, the bill puts forth that the director will evaluate the impact of fully recovering through fees the cost of administering the removal fill program associated with different project types, as well as the impacts on waters of this state. Are there any questions so far? Okay.
Sorry, I just have a quick question.
Yes.
Can't figure out how to raise my hand. Sorry. Of the percentage of your expenditures, what percentage of the expenditures is covering the costs of okay, so is the 21% directly tied to covering the cost of the wetland delineation reports?
So those revenues are a total of what we bring in for permitting, enforcement, and the wetland delineation reviews.
Okay, got it. Sorry, I just needed a little time with this, more time with this chart. Thank you.
That's okay. You're welcome. And Morgan, you have your hand. Oh, sorry, Samantha. Did you have any other questions?
Nope, that was it.
Okay. Morgan, you have your hand raised.
Thank you. And totally new to this, so please forgive me if I'm asking questions other people know the answers to. So just following up on that quickly. So on 2023, the 4.4 million, that's the cost of staff time to do all the report preparations and enforcement activities and stuff, or?
It's staff time, it's overhead costs, it's DOJ, assistant attorney general reviews. There's a lot of things that are rolled into those expenditures.
Okay, and then a two-part question. One is, how many permits are we talking about? You know, like hundreds, thousands? I have no idea of the scope and scale of how many permits are being applied for each year.
That's definitely more information that we'll get into
Okay.
during future meetings. Off the top of my head, it's an average of like 350 removal fill permits, a couple hundred general authorizations, and well over 300 wetland delineation reviews, and over 300 or so wetland determinations.
Okay, thank you. And then last question for now. On the permits, are there certain, so I'm just trying to think of how to ask this question. Like, are some people getting a bigger discount than others? So for example, does, removal permit X, you guys charge $25 and it only costs you $25 to do it? Like, are there some of these processes or reports or permits or fees where, the average subsidy is 79%, but some of them, like, are there some that cost thousands of dollars and the people are only paying like $100? And there are some that cost maybe $50 and it only costs $75. Is there are they all being equally subsidized, or are some super heavily subsidized versus others?
At this point, I'm not equipped to answer that question, but we can definitely work on getting you an answer when we talk about those permits in a future meeting.
Okay.
Does that work for you?
Yes, thank you. I just think if we're gonna have a discussion about raising fees or changing the fees, it would just be interesting to know. This is a common thing for agencies that deal with K-12. We have fee-funded agencies where some of the licenses and fees cover the costs for the agencies, and others are being heavily subsidized, by the general fund or the agency reserves.
Okay. Thank you. Do you have any more questions?
No, thank you.
Okay. And Peggy, I see your hand is raised.
Thank you. I just want to follow up with some Morgan's comments, because part of what he said is, so yes, the answer in general is yes, there are different costs, and some permits are more complicated than others, and the fees are the same depending upon the type of permit. So that's one of the conversations I hope we're going to have, is around that. But the other part that I wanted to say is, what is the agency actually doing related to removal fill programs? And is it doing the right amount of things to protect wetlands and to address the issues that we need around development and whatever? So I hope that the conversations that we have includes more than just a directed focus on dollars, but also on the program itself. Thank you.
Yes, I'll touch a little bit on that in the presentation and we can go into more detail in future meetings. As you saw earlier, the future meetings will be focusing on specific rule divisions and specific rules. So we can go into more detail in those meetings. Samantha, I saw you had your hand up.
Yeah, and I think based on what you're saying, we're probably gonna get into it. But yeah, I think taking off of what was said earlier, what will be really helpful if we're not gonna get to that is an understanding of the different costs and fees that people are paying. You'll hear me say this a lot in this RAC. We are in an affordable housing crisis, and regulatory overhead directly impacts the cost of the housing product at the end of the day. And so builders and developers are out of pocket themselves in doing this with hiring wetland consultants, et cetera, and going through these processes. And so I just wanted to make sure that when we have this conversation and we do get to the different fee structures, that we're having a good baseline understanding of total costs, not just incurred by the state.
Mm-hmm. Understandable. And the RAC members have received emails from Sylvia asking you to sign up for interviews with her. And these are definitely things that you want us to explore in future meetings to make sure that we do talk about them. These are definitely things to bring up during those interviews. All right. Any other questions at this time? Okay. I believe this is where I left off. So during the upcoming RAC meetings, members will be asked to provide input on the proposed tiered fee structures, the proposed fees, related proposed rule language, and potential fiscal impacts. Rulemaking related to policy changes has been or will be separate from this rulemaking process. Oh, I'm sorry. My slideshow progressed, but yours did not. Here we go. This was the slide I was just on. For recent upcoming policy-focused rulemaking, the department is also identifying ways to improve review processes, refine submission requirements to prevent staff requests for more information, update rules for clarity and transparency, and increase the number of activities eligible for general authorizations. So some of those rulemakings have been in 2023, we worked on Division 90, which are the wetland delineation reports. Between 2023 and 2024, we revised the general authorization rules in Division 89. Coming up at the beginning of 2025, we'll begin rulemaking processes for removal fill permitting, which is Division 85. And in late 2025, we'll begin rulemaking for the general permits, which are in Division 93. To determine the tiered fee structure, the planning and policy staff members look closely at the complexity, the length of review time, size, and scope of the project of each type of permit and authorization and wetland delineation the department reviews, as well as the benefits to the environment. Additionally, several data sets were included in the calculation of the proposed fees. We looked at fiscal data, which revenues, expenditures, staff salary, staff time tracking data, annual permit application data, annual general authorization notifications, annual number of wetland determinations and delineations received. After this meeting, along with the proposed fees and rule language, you'll be receiving an overview of the methodology of looking at all of what went into determining the fees. And during our conversations with you, our community engagement officer talked with RAC members prior to this meeting. And what we heard from a lot of y'all were that small scale projects should not be treated the same as large scale projects. DSL customer service is highly valued. Those impacted by increased fees have varying levels of flexibility in accommodating them. Housing production is a critical issue. We need to strike a balance between the competing priorities, public school funding versus regulated public and housing. And increasing the fees drastically in a short amount of time is not realistic to implement. And at this time, before we move on, are there any other questions that we have?
I don't see any hands up.
Okay.
Yes, Stephanie in the chat, thank you. This is a lot of information. So it's a lot to digest. Okay, well, thank you. And these slides again will be up so that you can continue to review this information. And like Danielle said, you will be receiving the draft rules and proposed fee structures this week. So that'll be some other good information for you to review as we continue moving forward. We went through that relatively quickly and we are way ahead of schedule, which I think is a good thing. But I do want to make plenty of space for questions or thoughts if folks have them. So Peggy, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Sorry, folks. I know we all want to get on with our lives. But I just want to make sure that I understand that we are looking at a tiered system. We are going to be looking at the multiple complex issues around raising the fees and who gets hurt, who doesn't, and whatever. And then the other part is, I also understand that the governor's office is considering an opportunity for the department to gain some more data information separate from this fee process, but particularly related to housing. But frankly, because we need more data for wetlands, and everybody on this RAC needs more data about wetlands. So I just want to make sure that I understand that and want to make sure that people know that that's being considered as a part of general fund, not a part of common school fund. Am I correct?
I believe so. Dana, do you have anything to add to that, to speak to that?
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Peggy. Yes, we do have some, for now, policy option packages that are in response to the governor's housing office coming from the housing production advisory committee work or council work. So we have provided some response to that in terms of what resources would be needed. And in addition, we have some placeholder legislative concepts in case there is anything needed statutorily to change. So don't have language for that yet, and we're still discussing if anything is needed. But yes, there are some potential positions, funding resources, and perhaps policy changes that could come out of the next legislative session.
Peggy, did that answer the question?
Only if I can unmute. Yes, it does. I really simply wanted to make sure that the rest of the RAC knew that that was happening, because not everybody is involved in all of those other discussions that are going on. And I think it's really important for people to know that although we're dealing with this set of permits and this set of fees, that outside of that, there's a recognition that the removal fill program needs to be increased in its ability to do its work, and it has to be done outside of the common school fund. So thank you. And sorry, Dana, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I think it's important for people to know what's happening.
No problem. That's what I'm here for.
Great, thank you, Peggy. And Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Sylvia. I'm not sure how to ask this question. I think it's a historical context question and probably more suited to staff at DSL that are on the call. I'm interested in the history of the fee structure, and I guess more specifically, how many times have DSL approach the legislature for direct funding for the permit program, and how many times has that been unsuccessful? I'm guessing it's 100% unsuccessful, but I'm asking, I guess, about how many times we've approached that solution. 80% almost of a revenue shortfall seems like a big gap to try to cover with additional fees in my mind, but I'm open for any input you have on that subject. Thank you.
Dana, I think you might have a little more information on this than I would. You've been with the department longer than I have.
I will admit that coming up through the positions in DSL, I was not always paying attention historically to what was happening with the legislature, and I've only been there, well, 16 years, but in the 16 years, I don't recall that we've approached the legislature ourselves to change the fees. As Danielle showed in earlier slides, we actually haven't had any updates to the fees in statute in quite a long time. So I can't say that we've been unsuccessful in the past approaching that. The history of the fee structure is that they've been set in statute for a while. I think once we were assigned the removal fill program, there wasn't funding attached to that. So just the fees that were in rule for the different application types that Danielle referred to is what we've been dealing with. So.
Thank you, Daniel. If I could refine my question, maybe I didn't ask it the right way. I guess I was thinking more, not so much about the changing of the fees themselves, but more about a solicitation or a request, let's say, to the legislature for direct support from, I don't know, the general fund, let's say, to support permits. And I think, for me anyway, there's some value in approaching that or leaving that as an open option because, of course, DSL's permit work in Oregon is not just for the landowners or the project owners, it's to protect the resources for all the citizens in Oregon. And therefore, perhaps there's a play, perhaps there's a compelling reason why the general fund should offer at least some support for the program. Maybe not full support, not 100% funding out of the general fund, but at least some proportion of general funds that would offset this 80% gap we're talking about. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for that reframing, Chris. I appreciate it. I will find out if the removal fill program has ever been receiving general funds. I don't believe so, but I do hear you, and what I think we'll get to in future meetings is different cost recovery percentages, and we will have to discuss, if we're not covering a percentage of the program, so not paying for it in full through application fees, we will have to find a source to cover the remaining. And so that may be an ask for general funds. It may be some other way. I think that's part of what we'll be discussing. But I hear your point about that perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris and Dana. And Stan? And I'm sorry, Stan, we're going to wait for your comment until we get to the public comment period, which will be in about probably 10 or so minutes.
Oh, okay. I thought this was that public.
Thank you. And we're not, yeah, we do have that slide up, so I apologize. We're still hearing from RAC members on their questions about the history and background. We'll get to you in a moment. Peggy, over to you.
Yeah, I just really want to help answer the question since I've been around a long time. That's why the gray hair. So just a general comment, Chris, is that that DSL has almost never had any general fund. We have only in the last few years received any general fund for any of their programs. The other thing is that Oregon has had a history of requesting fees for permits. That if you want a service, you have to pay for it. That's true with DEQ, with Water Resources, and other agencies. And so that's been a culture of that has happened in the past. We are now beginning to have the conversation that you want to have, and that's what's the general public's responsibility versus the responsibility of the person who wants to pay, who wants the service and should pay for it. And so that's part of the conversation, which is why I brought up a minute ago the fact that the DSL is asking, or may be asking, depending on the governor, for some general fund monies for some general work related to wetlands outside of the permit process, so that perhaps the permit process can be less expensive because they have the data ahead of time. So I hear what you're saying, but I just really wanted to let you know that the conversation around who pays, it is a long time conversation in the legislature, and that's part of what I do as a volunteer. Thanks. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Peggy. All right, and any other questions from RAC members or initial thoughts and comments on what you've just heard? Okay. Okay, so now we can move into our interested party comments. So I'll ask any members of the public or interested parties, if you want to make a comment, just go ahead and raise your hand, and Stan will go to you first. But just before we dive in, just a few protocols for interested party comments. We'll allow about 3 minutes per comment, and when I call your name, we'll just ask you to say your name, your organization, or any other representation information that you have, and just try to keep your comments respectful and related to what the committee has been discussing today. So Stan, I know you wanted to make a comment. Is there anyone else? You can feel free to raise your hand in a few minutes, but just making a check. Okay, Stan, over to you.
Hey, I think I'm ready to go.
Yep, go ahead.
Yes, Stan Thomas, and I own Rocky Point Marina. I'm also a representative for WOO, the Waterfront Organization of Oregon. We represent the floating home communities, yacht clubs, so forth. A lot of them have to do dredging. And I just want some clarity on this dredging and what we do to maintain our facilities. Apply under all the things we're discussing here in the fill and removal permits. I didn't see it in the pictures.
I'll refer to Russ for that, as he's our removal fill specialist.
Stan, could you restate the question? I apologize for.
Well, I was just curious, does what we're talking about here of these fees, we do a lot of dredging in the marinas and the yacht clubs and moorages. It's a very high expense to them. It's a maintenance. Is this what we're talking about here, raising the rates? Is that included in the marina dredging permit process? Because it's part of the fill and removal permit.
Yes, so it would be all applications, including dredging, would be included in the fee, removal fill fee.
So there's all these marinas that utilize this service, and I was a little surprised that there wasn't any invited it on to the advisory committee, because that's a pretty large community of people that have to get a permit every 5 to 10 years. I just want some clarity. Thank you very much.
Right. Well, thank you, Stan. It sounds like, yeah, the dredging applications are included, so appreciate that and you following along. Okay, great. Are there any other interested parties that wanted to make a comment at this time? Okay, then we can move into our next piece, which is just next steps and wrapping up here. So if we go to the next slide, Danielle, I'll turn over to you for these next steps.
All right, thank you. So as we've mentioned before, following this meeting, draft rule language and proposed tiered fee structures and fees will be sent to the RAC members for their review. So we are sending all 4 divisions ahead of time to give you plenty of time to look at everything and digest it ahead of our first meeting. So that way, you know, you can review everything together and just be prepared for the upcoming meetings. So also in the next week, a meeting summary will be sent to RAC members and today's meeting recording will be posted. Prior to each meeting, a meeting agenda will be sent as well as a draft fiscal impact statement and other related materials. So those, depending on when they're ready, we'll send it at least a week in advance, if not sooner. But we just want to give you time to review that before we talk about it at the meetings. The focus of the meetings, of course, will be the draft rule language and the proposed fees. And then all meeting materials will be posted to DSL's rulemaking website. There's the link there. It's the same link that I put into the chat earlier. And that's what's coming up next. Do we have any questions about the next steps for this rulemaking? And also on this, to add to this is the interview scheduled with Sylvia to talk about any concerns you have. So that's why we're also hoping, you know, we're going to get the rule language and fees out to you as soon as possible so that you can review them and bring up any things that you want to talk about in future RAC meetings, questions that you want us to address. You can bring those up in your interviews with Sylvia and she'll get that back to us so that it'll help us prepare for what information we need to give to you.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Danielle. And for RAC members, in the email I sent over for scheduling those little interviews, there are a few dates, lots of date options, but if something doesn't work for you, just feel free to send me an email with what does work for you, and we could try to find a time to meet. We tried to set up the dates for those interviews so that you have enough time to look at the draft rule language and fee information before the interviews, but then also enough time for the team to then digest what you said before the next RAC meeting. So kind of looking at that July 18th through 25th period as much as possible for those conversations, but we can go a little bit before or after that if needed to. All right. Any questions about that?
And real quick to address quick address to Ron's comment in the chat is that some of what you're talking about is the proprietary leases for submersible lands. That's covered under Division 82, the waterway leases, is licenses and registrations. The dredging that we're talking about is for the general permits. And so the cost of dredging within lease considerations is not something that's a part of this rulemaking.
That's a helpful clarification. Thanks, Danielle. All right, well, let's go to the next slide here.
Sorry.
No problem. A lot to manage. Great. Okay, well, I think we're at the conclusion of our meeting. So I'll just see, well, maybe just last call, RAC members, any other questions, comments, clarifications before we end the meeting today? Okay, and then I'll see Danielle or Dana if you have kind of any closing thoughts for the RAC as we adjourn.
I'd like to thank everybody for their time today and your thoughtfulness with your questions and your comments. And again, we want to make sure that we address everybody's questions and comments. So those interviews with Sylvia, I'm gonna hype those again, is that those would be really useful for us. So Dana, I don't know if you have anything you want to share.
No, just thank you for everyone attending, being part of the RAC, and for the interested parties. We'll hope to keep everyone abreast, and just looking forward to the future meetings and discussions and hearing the various perspectives so we can get the best rule out that we can.
All right, thank you so much, and thanks, RAC members. We'll see you at the next meeting on August 14th, and I will hopefully talk to all of you in the little interviews before then. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks all.
All right, I think it's
I need to stop the recording.